Hello, I'm coming today. I'll talk to you about the passion of my life, language of joy. I got onto this path in my 30s and I noticed that when I said I'm sorry, my shoulders would slump, my head would fall, and I would be filled with shame and blame and guilt and I said it many times a day. If I bumped into somebody, if I dropped something, if I said something I didn't like. And so I decided I would stop saying I'm sorry. I went down the hallway going to the room where I'm going to go into a meeting late, and I kept reminding myself, say excuse me, say excuse me. And I walked into the room and I said I'm sorry. I felt so discouraged. How was I going to get rid of this? Because I knew it now as an automatic reaction. So I decided that I would just say the excuse me after the I'm sorry. I didn't feel the guilt and shame anymore. I felt proud of myself for having noticed and made the change. Probably took about 3 months before the excuse me just came naturally. And I'm not sure exactly when the I'm sorry fell away. I just noticed one day, probably about 9 months later, that I didn't say it anymore. And I realized how much less guilt and shame I felt in my day and myself. That had really done a lot to clear those emotions that I'd carried since childhood. So then I started exploring other words, the shoulds and have-tos, the buts, you deserve. I lived in intentional communities for many years, and I started noticing not how the words we spoke didn't really foster communication and connection. And so I started doing workshops at a lot of the events that I did with the community conferences, those kinds of things, talking about the buts and the shoulds and the I'm sorries. I feel like a lot of people really appreciated being aware for the first time of how these words affected them. In my mid-60s, I decided I was going to write a book about language and write about all these different words. And in part of that process, I realized that I hadn't added the verb to be to my list. The is, am, are, was, were verbs that I knew as problematic. And so I made a point of taking all those verbs out of my language as I wrote, so that I would write the whole book without the verbs to be. So I started taking those out of my spoken language, which I found much more difficult. I had a mate in my community that was willing to work language with me. And when I cleared a lot of those words from my spoken language as well as my written language, I stopped fighting with myself, because it took the good, bad, the yes, no out of my language when I stopped using those verbs. For instance, I am upset gives me this sense that this is the way I live in my life. But then there's part of me that doesn't want to be upset and starts to argue with myself about it. Whereas if I say I feel upset now, there's really nothing to argue about. I found when I consistently took those verbs out of my language and started doing it more in my verbal language as well, I found a peace, a quiet I'd never known before. I can remember sitting on my bed, just looking out the window and so happy to just sit there and feel fine just sitting there with no voices in my head, arguments going on inside me, just this peace. So there came a point when I had changed and used the language of joy, what I've come to count the language of joy, in my language consistently. All the blame shame games in my head disappeared. And so it was great to then take this and put it in my book, to be able to share how I came to my peace and joy, and that I think you can as well. It takes some time and some focus, and like most evolutions of change, you start off at one level and you hit it, and up you found it, and it takes you around some, and then you kind of stop paying so much attention and you lose it a little bit, and then you realize that you've lost it and you catch it again, and it keeps going, and this time it's a little higher on the circle as it goes around the spiral. And at this point in my life, I very rarely find myself in any kind of talk in my head, any kind of berating myself for any reason. There are times when I've gone to a workshop and I spent a whole weekend talking around language of joy, this thing may come back a little bit. And I wish that for you. I know that with the same kind of focus, you can find your peace and your joy, because just by changing your language, you change how you view the world. I want to talk about the different views of the world between the English language and what I call the language of joy. The language of joy, to me, falls closer to some of the Aboriginal or native languages that are verb-based. That holds my intention, to create a language that's based more on feelings, on verbs, on the actuality of existence. There's a man called Rupert Ross who went and studied with the Aboriginals in northern Canada. And I want to read you, because how he writes it is so poignant. Imagine, if you will, two English-speaking people coming out of a movie. The first says, "Boy, that was a depressing movie." The second says, "Boy, that was an inspiring movie." They speak as if they believe the movie is something all by itself. As a result, it seems perfectly reasonable to argue about who had characterized it correctly and who had missed the mark. When I'm with Aboriginal people, however, I keep hearing a different way of exchanging information. One boy might say, "I feel depressed after seeing that movie." The following which the other one laughs and says, "No kidding, I feel really inspired by that movie." They have no suggestion of arguing over whose judgment turns out correct, because they didn't express any judgment. Instead, the reaction they settle in each person's emotional reaction, and the expectation is that they are likely to be very different from each other. And so the difference becomes all important. When we come to look at healing, speaking in that way, he says, it seems to him, constantly declares an understanding that part of the richness of life rests in the fact that all human beings will likely respond in unique and interesting ways to the same events. If you decide that the first reality is constant change, if you discard our belief in the usefulness of judgmental statements like good, bad, right, wrong, and instead choose to speak in terms of relative movement, like towards harmony, then a lot of other things change as well. It has to do with the difference between standing behind triple pane windows on your cliffside mansion, watching the sun go down over a quieting ocean, and watching instead the first beginnings of a sunrise over that same ocean, but from flat on your belly on a wet surfboard 300 miles out from shore as the ocean beneath you awakens. In the cliffside mansion, There lives a conviction of separation, stability, and control. On the surfboard, there is a conviction of intimate and inescapable forces, unfathomable powers, which while they might let you ride them, will never let you gain control over them. If you find yourself alone on a surfboard as the ocean starts to stir, there is no way to know what it will bring you that day. The only true certainties are that you cannot change those waves, only the way you ride them, and that your riding will depend on how much you can accommodate yourself to their forces. To me, the Aboriginal language gives us a much more realistic view of the energy of the world. We can't control the world. We've tried that for decades now and found that we can't control Mother Earth. We can only accommodate ourselves to her forces and live in harmony with her. This is part of the essence of why also, to me, the changing away from traditional English into more of a verb energy-based language makes the ability to connect to the earth and to each other much more possible, because we're moving out of the good bad, the right wrong, into a harmony. I would also like to highlight how the English language supports our domination culture. 4 main ways that I see. It allows us to make a judgment into a fact, into a permanent condition. There's a suppression of self that comes. I'm such a, whatever negative phrase you happen to use for yourself most often. The diminishing of self allows the control culture to have more control over us. The moralistic judgments. He's such a jerk. Again, it divides us. It keeps us at odds with each other. That doesn't serve us, but serves the combative culture we live in. And the bureaucratic languages, the shoulds, have to, must. You should follow the rules, you know. When in fact, they're man-made rules that you can choose to follow or not once you have a sense of yourself and whether you want to do those things. And the last one that I've gleaned is the concept of deserve. That we can think that because someone did a particular action we didn't like, that they deserve punishment, they deserve to be killed. Referring to the Aboriginal cultures that I've spoken of, they use restorative justice. They address the person comes and presents himself to the people he has wronged and expresses his regret. He has people that work with him to help him do the healing that he needs, or she, to be able to fit back into the culture as a valued part of the culture. We don't deserve punishment. We deserve healing if we have been wounded enough that we can damage other people in our state of confusion. I wanted to introduce my books. I have 2 little books. This book deals more with some of the concept changes that I see beneficial in the English language. And this little book answers the question, but if I don't use those words, what do I say instead? Things like the shoulds and the have-tos. I give you 12 different things that you can say instead. And also the little word but. I talk about how to step out of that word, because people use it just as a filler in language, and yet it divides the world into good and bad in ways that aren't really conscious. If I say I love you and I need my space, it feels very different than if I say, I love you, but I need my space. The but cancels out the I love you. This and many other of the language changes are in this little book. This book deals with concept changes and actualities about how we use language. For instance, as young children, our bodies take on automatic reactions. The first time a person touches a hot stove, the signal has to go all the way to the brain for the signal to come back and say, take your hand off. But over time, our bodies accommodate, and the signal only has to make it maybe to the elbow before your hand moves, long before you've thought about it. And the same thing happens with our emotional beings. We come up with automatic reactions to certain words and phrases, kind of like I couldn't stop saying I'm sorry. It was just an automatic reaction. And this little book talks about those things and ways to help you to step out of those automatic reactions. For instance, when we were talking about the I'm sorry, I couldn't stop saying it. And I found a way around it to where I could get it out of my language. This is the kind of thing that I put in here. Come to the languageofjoy.com website. It gives you information about many, many language pieces that I've spoken of and many more as well. And there you can buy my little books, the 2 little books that I've spoken of before that will help you to find a more peaceful place within yourself and in the world. Talk to you soon.